My name is Nojin Kwak. I'm a director of the Nam Center for Korean Studies at International Institute, and also I'm an associate professor in COM Studies. I'm one of the discussants for this panel, and I'm going to introduce our speaker first for this panel. Annabelle Sreberny is a professor at the Center for Media and Film Studies and chair of the Center for Iranian Studies in the School of Oriental and African Studies at University of London. She also is a president of the International Association for Media and Communication Research. Professor Sreberny's research has focused primarily on the field of international communication, increasingly on globalization with a foresight on international news, questions of diaspora, and with a strong feminist orientation. For over 30 years, her work on Iran has examined the nexus of politics and communications from the process of 1979 revolution reflected in her influential book titled The Small Media, Big Revolution, to the emergence of contemporary dynamic Persian language presence on the net, reflected in her recent book titled Blogistan. Her title today is New Media and the Middle East, Thinking Aloud. Here is the professor.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me say to thank Kelly and Will for this very nice invitation. It's great to be here. And thank you, Pat, for looking after me, really exemplary. My title comes from a radio program on the BBC called Thinking Aloud, A-L-O-U-D. So, of course, I thought, let's play with that. And thinking is aloud, and where else better to think than Ann Arbor. This is kind of crazy. I've traveled over 16 hours to be with you in the room for less than 8. Perhaps we should have Skyped. I didn't think of that. But it was actually an easy decision because I know people. I know Paddy. I know Joe from IMCR. I've read Ruth. Nobody mentioned Anthropology That Breaks Your Heart. Wonderful title. I have read James's work. I know Juan from his blog, etc., etc. So for me, it was partly the chance to meet and converse face to face with a terrifically good group of people. But I also thought, from your part and from mine, it was a gamble. I thought it was a gamble worth making. But I use this language because I actually think that gambling at the moment is perhaps a more provocative metaphor about many social processes, even better than Susan Sontag's illness metaphor, sick societies and all of that. I've been having this internal argument with Ulrich Beck for a long time of risk society, because we both mitigate risk with all sorts of insurance. Lloyd's and Swiss Re are the two tallest buildings in London. We hedge our bets and stock market investments. But we also need to take risks to produce change. And particularly in 2011, which is an amazing year, so many people are taking a gamble that social change will go in the direction they want. And just listening here, we've also had the phrase, the real stakes at work, against all odds. So there is something about this metaphor of social and political life as a poker game. One of the regulatory guys in Inside Job, which I've only just had a chance. The good thing about long-distance flights is you catch up with all the films you haven't seen. Inside Job says, I only, those were the cards that were dealt me, etc., etc. Right? And of course, for many of the people actually making political change this year, some, of course, are pushing for change with literally nothing left to lose. I had kind of intellectual conniptions and had to email a little bit with Will, what's this day about? And like people have said, and also, I want to thank you for your stamina. My sense as I listened during the day, Tahrir Squares, that's done, diaspora, that's done, spatiality, that's done, what do I have to say? I hope I take a sort of back to the beginning, and perhaps it's just throwing the same counters or cards up in a different kind of shape. So I have tried a little bit to focus on the question of region, particularly because I've taken my focus on the Middle East. I want to start with three broad issues which I think are interconnected, which again have been here during the day. Mediated communication has altered many, if not most, aspects of contemporary life. Certainly there's a widespread recognition in most developed societies and increasingly many developing ones, and all the time I think our language is now in quote marks. I mean, how do we even talk? Is it north-south? There's there's regression in the north and there's dynamism in the south, but let me just say developed and developing. We recognize these societies not only as mediatized, which is a current trope, but as multimediatized. And we see and feel the impacts in our culture, the shift in our economies, the significance of the cultural information sectors as arenas of investment and profit, the challenges to older sources of belief and value like religion from the secular thrust of much media, as well as the increased use of communications by religious groups, etc., etc. I'm going to pick up two main thematics in this multimediatized environment, which are space and politics. So again, the day started with what I'm interested in. Clearly, media offer the possibility, the affordances of new forms of spatiality. Mediated communication open up the possibility of multiple kinds of identification and interaction, small scale and much larger. Again, scale is with us. Media have been a major driver and reinforcer of globalization and our growing sense of living in an interconnected world and a shrinking single planet. They allow us to act bigger and beyond methodological nationalism, as Beck has put it, to communicate with people at a distance in transnational networks and with our nation's diasporas. But they also allow us to act smaller with people in our cities, in our locales, much closer to home. An interesting new book by the British media anthropologist John Postile is called Localizing the Internet, and is based on the notion of a field of residential affairs, which speaks very much to the last panel, in which occupational, social, and digital networks cross-cut to produce new forms of residential sociability. Our spatial connections are now a concertina of possibilities, and these are not mutually exclusive. And in fact, to make a wave, I love, goodness gracious me, I thought you were going to do going out for a bland English, which is my favorite one. Yeah. But I actually think instead of using Laurie Thomas's Thinking Aloud, I should have titled this Pete and Dud's Not Only, But Also. Because I think that's where we are. It's not only this or that, it's both together. And both at the same time, and both in the morning because I'm feeling this way, this politics is pulling me big, and at night at home, this politics is pulling me small. So it's not only, but also. And then multimedia-tized, new forms of spatiality. And the third general point is making connections, again, it's not new, we've had this throughout the day, making connections with various groups at a distance often offer up the possibility of many differing identifications, differing forms of performing identity, far more complex than the unitary bourgeois notion that still runs through so much of our material. And these might summon up different forms of political investment, the gamble, that might include supporting a local library from closure, voting in national elections, but also being active in a transnational social movement, like the environment or currently the Occupy events. Indeed, the use of various kinds of media to help politicize and produce the new, old forms of political activism that we're witnessing, and perhaps even participating in ourselves, gives us the gamble that both change is possible, but also, even more important, that the future will be better than the past. So where might a study of regions fit here, and what does it offer our understanding? This is well-rehearsed terrain. Clearly, anthropology established with the imperial desire to understand the other, while post-Second World War area studies continued the hegemonic desire to control the other. So both are imbricated in power games of knowledge. My own institution, SOAS, which dare not speak its full name, which is written out, School of African and Oriental Studies, right? We didn't change the name, we just, went back to the acronym. Part of the University of London claims on its website to be the world's leading center for the study of a highly diverse range of subjects concerned with Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. It was set up by the Foreign Office to understand the rest of the world. And it remains one of the prime locations for area studies in the UK. I helped to set up the newest disciplinary focus at SOAS, Media and Film Studies. And we've just had big discussions about sort of restructuring. And it was evident that there's an ongoing tension, which I recognize also runs in American academe, between the disciplinary specialists and those doing, quote, area studies. So much so that at SOAS we couldn't resolve the debate. It kind of continue with business as usual. What we say in media and film studies is that we're taking Western theory for a walk to see what it offers and what it occludes, and that we're not just talking about de-Westernizing media theory, which has become a powerful trope in our field, but actually doing it, again, through grounded ethnographic work on the global South. There are clearly many different debates and discussions to be had in this general terrain. I want to pick up, while it's evident that new media played some role in the recent events in parts of the Arab world, there are big problems associated with extracting only one mode of communication, new media, one technology, or even one portal, like Facebook or Twitter, to stand for the entire complex process of developing contentious politics in the Middle East. So I'm going to tell a bit of a story of what happened and then return to my three main issues: changing spatiality, the changing nature of politics, and thirdly, the need for interdisciplinarity. And I use, in an evocative sense rather than fully theorize, I think, the notion of assemblage, both in Saskia Sassen's descriptive sense, but also invoking Deleuze and Delander's development of assemblage as a set of an emergent contingent ensemble of practices and things. So, to the region. The joke goes that Mubarak dies and meets Nasser and Sadat in the afterlife, and they ask him, were you poisoned or shot, which is the fates that happened to them, and Mubarak shrugs and answers, Facebook. Right? And evidently there is a story that an Egyptian family recently named their newborn daughter Facebook. So there's no doubt we're witnessing a world historical moment, 2011, as a world historical year. The insurrectionary wave that started in Tunis in December 2010 and is still unfolding across the Maghreb and Middle East has raised important questions about the role of new media technologies and platforms in contemporary political mobilizations. There's quite possibly never been such a dramatic sense of political change in contiguous nations ever. If the revolutions of 1848 in Europe were supposed to be inspired by each other, how much more might it be the case in an environment of 24-hour transnational news broadcasts and world-encircling internet? As Lenin is supposed to have said, and I have to confess, I've picked this up, but I cannot find the Lenin quote in Lenin's work, but as Lenin is supposed to have said, sometimes decades pass and nothing happens, and sometimes weeks pass and decades happen. So it's been a momentous 3/4 of a year. It's evident that both new and old media have played significant and fascinating roles in these recent insurrections to topple autocratic regimes from Tunis to Cairo and beyond. New media can no longer be considered the epiphenomena of political movements, but are rather significant tools of political mobilization. And if I might be allowed a moment of sort of self-congratulation, which I don't do often, but I'm going to claim it. You heard the title of my book, Small Media, Big Revolution, the Iranian Revolution of 1979. In some ways, at some level, there is nothing new in our discussion. It's only that the tools are more diffused, better developed, even more immediate and powerful than they were then. So, this whole terrain is not new. I'm going to try, just like Ruth, I'm just going to run some images as I talk. I'm looking at a wonderful rubber keyboard, which I've never seen before, but I don't know how to use it. Okay.
Let it play.
Just run them. Yep.
All right.
I'm not going to speak to them. You've got three countries, Iran, Tunisia, and Egypt. And it should be clear. And I talk to them, but I don't want to go through them. I don't want to repeat the fatuous claim that Tunisia was a Twitter revolution, as indeed was claimed for the Green movement in Iran after the 2009 election, nor to argue that such tools are indispensable for political change. Clearly, people have made revolution before without such tools. But in repressive regimes where where face-to-face public politics is extremely curtailed, a platform such as Facebook can provide space where silence and fear are overcome and trust can be built, where social networks can turn political, and where home and diaspora can come together. The Islamic Republic allowed the use of Facebook in the run-up to the presidential election, and Iranians who are huge networkers embraced it with relish, sharing family photos and linking with friends around the world. After the election result that gave Ahmadinejad 68% of the vote, it was fascinating, this is what you're seeing, to watch Facebook literally turn green. Individual photos replaced with signs asking, where is my vote? Where is their vote, depending where you were located? A considerable number of green-inflected pages with news, video, art, and discussion. And this all actually continues despite, and Juan and I might continue this discussion about why it failed, this sort of political movement is still there. Citizen journalists became self-appointed contemporary historians, and they are photographing and filming events and uploading them to YouTube for an interested global audience to find. And indeed, much of this content has been picked up and broadcast by old media. Whatever the intentions of their corporate developers, social media in many countries are being used to provide news and information hard to come by from regime channels, to develop alternative narratives, to plan and coordinate action, and to tell and show each other and the world what's going on. And I think the power of image here cannot be underestimated. And I actually think as academics, it's interesting that more and more we're showing photographs, right? Sometimes we might put up a long quote, but we can talk, but we're actually using the image to show and to make a point. So the Middle East movements have all been, as politics probably everywhere is, a mix of face-to-face politics and use of contemporary small media, from social networks to mobile telephony and email. And the technologistic reduction of Iran or Tunisia to Twitter revolutions has little explanatory value and only serves to inflate American corporate sensibility of contributing to the global spread of democracy. Importantly, the internet, and we've said this before today, is used in ways that differ from society to society. Insurrectionary movements are rolling out in countries with internet penetration ranging from less than 2% in Yemen to 6% in Libya, to 21 or 34% in Egypt and Tunisia, and 88% in Bahrain. These countries have responded in different ways to popular dissent, capitulation, negotiation, violent repression. The political actors that matter, those on the ground in authoritarian regimes, have not been cyber-utopians, but have been trying to protect themselves from regime surveillance with a range of internet tools, from Tor, the routing project which enables online anonymity, to encryption. Iranians were teaching each other about security and sharing proxies and filters long before hubristic projects like Haystack, software designed by a young American nonprofit who created an American nonprofit organization to combat Iran internet censorship, had been dreamt up. So there's an important link between face-to-face politics and more technologically mediated communication. There are different forms of repressive states, different histories of political action, and differentiated access to new forms of communication, from internet platforms to mobile telephony. One size, one solution does not fit all. The conditions and mix of platforms differs from country to country. And this is not based on rational choice in the face of available tools, as Western commentators seem to think. Oh, I think for my political purposes I'll use Facebook today. It's partly what is available, what is functioning, and what I have access to. Tunisians faced a far more pervasive police state than the Egyptians, with less latitude for blogging or press freedom, but their trade unions were stronger and more independent. The Kafaya movement had been blogging for many years in Egypt, and numerous YouTube videos were in circulation showing police torture and previous bread riots. Libyans had limited internet access, but mobile telephony was widespread. And the Syrians continue to function in a very difficult environment where many internet activists have set themselves up in Beirut, just a few hundred miles across the border. The Egyptian Facebook pages, We Are All Khaled Said, you'll see this, set up by Wael Ghonim, and the 6th of April youth movement became important nodes in a growing movement with over 100,000 followers, while new information sources such as Raz News and Egypt News Network function mainly through Facebook. And Juan, one point I wanted to argue with you is you said activists that you've spoken to have said the internet in their eyes was not very important. And for me, one of the interesting questions, I think, is who we and who the Western media are picking up as the activists and who, in a sense, is allowed to voice the movement. And I don't know if you've seen two very interesting documentaries by the BBC and a recent one called Images of Revolution from Al Jazeera, who, of course, because of their media background, are interested in internet activism and actually, of course, give us a lot of stories, including of young people from balconies watching demonstrations, videotaping or MMSing, images on the ground and broadcasting them. So, again, I think my argument would be it's not one or the other, but all of these tools were used in, more or less positive ways. Even the Egyptian military interim government announced the resignation of Shafiq and his replacement on their Facebook page. Twitter was clearly another way to keep in touch and share useful suggestions across national borders, as the Tunisian who tweeted, "Advice to the youth of Egypt, put vinegar or onion under your scarf for tear gas." Or like the Egyptian feminist Mona El Tahawi telling the world what was going on, or Gigi Ibrahim, who tweets as Angry Egyptian, teaching young Egyptians how to blog and tweet. These platforms provide instantaneity, the immediate diffusion of and access of information, and extensivity, ignoring national borders and addressing domestic and diasporic populations and foreigners alike. But such internet practices also intersected with intense face-to-face discussion in private places amongst old and new collectivities. I don't wish to argue, and there's no sense in which digital activists alone could have produced such social mobilization. And clearly what we've witnessed, and again has been invoked during the day, and we see around us, is a renewed significance of place. Tahrir, Benghazi, Zuccotti, St. Paul's, face-to-face engagement with strangers together on a political mission is exhilarating, no matter what other tools are used in the process. I would also argue that possibly as significant as the new social media platforms has been the role of old broadcasting, especially Al Jazeera Arabic and BBC Arabic, which played a multiplier role in articulating the diverse events across the region to other parts of the region, often relying again on eyewitness materials sent in by citizen journalists, self-appointed archivists of unfolding events, and thus disseminating news of events in Tunis to Tripoli, Cairo, and Manama, as well as to London and Ann Arbor. Al Jazeera English kept the rest of the world enthralled with strong on-the-ground coverage and moments of absolutely brilliant television direction. These included the use of split screen to broadcast Mubarak's last speech live, while showing the response in Tahrir Square, the scores of shoes being thrown at the screen, an unmistakable sign that his end was fast approaching. Anecdotal evidence suggests that both Al Jazeera Arabic and BBC Arabic were shown on the big screen set up in Tahrir Square and in central Benghazi. And I'm quite interested in sort of who controlled the remote in the square, who decided what image was going to be broadcast. And of course, a already produced sympathetic global public opinion might have played a role in the unanimous UN resolution to instigate the no-fly zone over Libya. And interestingly, as you probably heard it live on your screens, in the US, Hillary Clinton has, of course, berated the US media for its poor coverage, which was delivering audiences into the hands of Al Jazeera. We also know, and this has been evoked before, the demographic across this region is youthful, and as everywhere else, where possible, they've embraced new technologies to download music and film and keep abreast of events around the world. These movements are about the rising expectations and rising frustrations of unemployed young men and the social obstacles encountered by increasingly better educated young women. And they ring with an optimistic universalism for human rights and economic opportunities, or at least so far. And the recent rapid diffusion of mobile telephony and cheap digital cameras are pushing a more image-based culture. And the internet-savvy generation are quick to upload the evidence of the day onto platforms beyond the control of the Muhabarat, viewed by a global audience. I mean, I've argued at other times, it was actually very good of the Islamic Republic to curtail public leisure. The cinema continues. There's some theatre, but there aren't bars, there aren't dance halls, there isn't pole dancing, whatever your inclination. What a good thing to keep young people at home, slaves to their screens, so they all learn how to be the most brilliant hackers and evading of regime surveillance. There's clearly more to come, and you see some of this in Bahrain, in Yemen, in Syria, where the Facebook page, and I'm only alluding to English language ones, the Syrian Revolution, had 87,000 followers in March and 288,000 in September. And new policies to support a free press and internet access, of course, have to be written into the new constitutions emerging in Egypt and Tunisia. Regular Friday demonstrations in Tahrir have followed the ruling military council's extension of the state of emergency following the 9th of September raid of the Israeli embassy, with widespread rejection of the concept of military rule. A recent banner proclaimed, "It doesn't matter if you're wearing a suit or a pair of boxers, we reject your rule," a reference to Field Marshal Hussein Tantawi's downtown Cairo stroll in civilian attire, interpreted as an attempt to pave the way for long-term civilian rule. You might be interested to know that the third Arab blogging conference met in October in Tunis to share good practice, discuss surveillance, etc. Clearly, small alternative media, neither controlled by states nor big business, are not a simple answer to political repression, as Clay Shirky-style cultural optimists and Jared Cohen would have the Washington Beltway believe, but neither are they so controlled and monitored by strong states that nothing can be achieved, as the pessimists like Yevgeny Morozov would argue. When used creatively, with a rich mix of local, face-to-face politics, configured in the languages and symbols of national traditions, and in context where the older generation simply doesn't want to give up power, it's evident that the new digital small media punch way above their weight. So, what of our central concern area studies? What I've just described actually didn't manifest very much regional activity at all. Indeed, these have all been national movements of democratization with the flag as the main symbol of unity. In fact, in Libya, the fight around the different versions of the flag has been a powerful struggle for symbolic domination. In most cases, and again, this is on the table already, the deterritorialized national diaspora, whether in Dearborn or Manchester. Who knew we had a big Libyan community in Manchester? I didn't. We've just been told in Britain, oh, look, here are some Libyans living amongst you. Were reconnected to national politics and helped disseminate images of the national struggle, and the globe-encircling television players played their role. I think we have to ask who has and what continues to denote an area. How do such definitions function historically as political discourses and as analytic and heuristic devices? In a world that remains defined both analytically and phenomenologically, performatively, by nations. We carry passports, pay taxes, vote, etc., all national processes, but that is increasingly defined by globalizing and transnational connections, as Sasson argues, it's not clear now what the analytic impetus for area studies is. Where is the area if it's stretched across borders? When is it important, and of course, for whom? The basic assumption is something is shared through geographic contiguity, but then what do we make of the notion of the BRICS, those states that stand out from their regional pattern, or indeed of Europe, where different linguistic and cultural zones are divided as much as Enlightenment thinking and the Euro, once combined them, right? The region that I'm interested in has always been problematic. What is this region? There's not even agreement on its name, its borders, which countries are included. SOAS still uses Near East in contradistinction to Far East, which are, of course, both wonderfully London-centric constructions. Many definitions of the Middle East omit Turkey. Afghanistan sometimes appears. Sometimes the western border ends with Libya. Within the UN system, the recent construction is, of course, the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, including the Maghreb within the area. And it is, of course, cross-cut by a number of real-world political groupings. Recent events in Libya have posed problems of recognition for the African Union, to which Morocco does not belong, while recent politics, of course, challenge the Arab League. There are smaller cross-cutting groupings, including the Gulf Cooperation Council. So this particular region raises a host of issues about the purpose and nature of area studies, and most embodies the contradiction that Timothy Brennan points out between post-World War II international impulses, but also government-driven agendas. From European imperialism through lines in the sand to axis of evil and 9/11, the West has exploited, mapped, projected, and misconstrued this region. Latterly, we have seen and responded to it mainly in terms of oil and Islam, including many other social issues, not least the weak development of political institutions and processes, although pouring millions of dollars into its democratization. And then suddenly there is the Arab Spring, which I think seems to be an Al Jazeera nominalization, a wave of unrest that moves across the region. And for all the money, all the specialists, all the research, almost no one saw it coming. As my London colleague Tariq Sabri acted out in a paper at the IMCR conference in Istanbul in the summer, the first approach to events by experts and media alike was simply, he acted wonderfully, open-mouthed astonishment. Huh? Evidently, not all of the Arab world is involved. The monarchies continue and are trying to regroup. One oil-rich society, Bahrain, is in turmoil, and where the regime has showed itself to be quite brutal, supported when necessary by Saudi tanks, but so too is the poorest country in the region, Yemen. And in the rest of the region, the non-Arab countries are dealing with their own homegrown dissent, the camps on Israeli streets, the tents, the ongoing tension in Iran, while Turkey parlays a new regional role, an honest broker to some of these issues. If oil and Islam were two delimited foci, the other lurking third was always authoritarianism or the Middle Eastern democracy deficit, which was always to do with internal lacks and deficiencies, and rarely to do with Western arm trades, political support for conservative regimes to protect oil supplies, or skewed notions of what counts as development. Suddenly, the region has revealed its deep demand for democracy and rights. Its populations have risked life and limb for such freedoms, and the democracy deficit is returned to the West, where, and again we've invoked this, where surveillance and limits to dissent have increased, while falling voting numbers and distrust of politicians is at an all-time high. But we're also learning that there are different kinds of authoritarian systems and different relations between state and society, Pace Joe Migdal. The issue of repression and authoritarianism is one where serious area studies can usefully challenge the taken-for-granted verities of disciplinary approaches, where it does seem to me that politics is undergoing the biggest challenge. If new media are interesting because they don't obey boundaries, especially not national boundaries, And media have played a role in the transnationalization of global culture as much as they reinforce on a daily basis our own involvement in national cultural spheres. The Arab Spring, as I said, reveals the ongoing significance of national politics. I'll skip this. So what is new in new media? Is it new sociality, new sociability, new political forms, new political actors? There does seem to be the development of new forms of political activism beyond the now old new social movement type. We've seen the emergence of new kinds of political actors, and not only in the Middle East. The Indignados in Madrid, the Aganakistemenoi in Syntagma Square in Athens, UK Uncut, or the Occupy movements in New York and London. And of course, all are linked in some manner to the current global financial crisis. And we've seen already in some images of how Tahrir goes to Wisconsin, and you've just seen it. Tahrir Square in EC4 in London, right? A street has been renamed, or an area has been renamed Tahrir Square. The camp by St. Paul's in London was almost instantly dismissed as small and irrelevant, but it is organized along the lines of Tahrir. It has a lost and found tent, it has a media center, it has a university, and it's clearly just thrown the state church structure into huge confusion. And it's just issued a very intelligent manifesto, critical of the Corporation of London as a secretive structure, but with huge financial clout. Here I just wanted to invoke, it's terrible doing this against the clock. I seem to have lost the page. Some of the work that's beginning to interest me is by Joss Hans, for example, who's trying to theorize beyond the social movement notion of people located in space organizing around a particular interest and developing a very formal set of sort of political structures and resources. I can't find the acronym he's developed, which it's a QAN, a quasi-autonomous, spontaneous network. A very quick anecdote. I was speaking in Athens when the Syntagma Square started. I spoke at Beef Festival, which is a sort of ongoing, fairly radical festival, and the people there had given me a great map of the Greek left, the communists, the socialists, the anarchists, new elements, blah, blah, blah. And Syntagma Square, I think the first night, something like 30,000 people appeared, and they had no clue who these people were. This did not derive from the old classic political structures, the parties, nor from old social movements. Oh yes, a QAN, quasi-autonomous recognition network, highly distributed and difficult to control. Clearly, new media are important tools, I'm wrapping up, in such processes of contentious politics, but can we know when they will be successful? Iran in 2009 had a larger proportion of the population using small media than many of the Arab Spring countries, and more obvious international solidarity. Yet the Green Movement didn't manage to even get an election recount, let alone dislodge the supreme leader. The revolutionary claims, I would argue, of the Islamic Republic still have some popular support. Its leadership was ready to use violence when threatened, and the popular movement, to some extent, lacked a clear goal around which to organize. The use of Twitter in Tunisia and Facebook in Egypt clearly helped to mobilize the movements that toppled entrenched dictatorial figures. So perhaps the Arab revolutions of 2011 are better compared to the Iran of 1979 rather than Iran of 2009. I've said that I think there's been a significant role for old media, disseminating images and information around the region and around the world. And I would just end by saying, as again has been invoked before, good area studies needs to be interdisciplinary and rework Eurocentric approaches across the grain of local lives. It's self-evident that grounded empirical research in the non-West, and we can talk about that, that's an easy reduction, offers the possibility of the development of new theoretical models and frameworks that challenge the hubris and conceit of much of Western social scientific assumptions of the rest of the world as simply behind us. Many of my students were deeply affected by the Iran Green movement, others more recently by the Arab Spring. Those not from the region were deeply envious of the collective action and passion these moments embodied, and made them reflect on the lack in their lives of such possibilities. Perhaps the Occupy movement is changing that. Sassen argues for her assemblage of territory, authority, and rights, which actually we've invoked very well here, spatiality, political power, and the democratic demand for rights and citizenship, as the linking mechanisms between the national and the global, and almost unintentionally their resonances in my work with this. The emergent set of practices across the region, each rather differently configured within each nation, evoke precisely the novelties of these assemblages and their dynamism, within which, I've argued, new digital technologies and platforms have played significant roles. While I think we've witnessed considerable change, I wanted to end, I'm not going to play it, I'm not going to sing it either, although I like that. So far, I think the change that we've seen has been only political. And I think what's going to be important is how the change becomes encoded in legal structures, in different kind of socioeconomic practices, and in policies that benefit the whole of society. All these countries, and we, need socioeconomic emancipation, which has to include jobs with decent salaries, awareness of rights to eliminate corruption, support the emancipation of women and minorities, the rule of law, and more. That's what people in the region have been fighting for. As Hossein El-Hamalwi, an Egyptian activist, so neatly put it, we need to take Tahrir to the factories, to the universities, and to the workplace. And as the British pop group, The Who, sang it years ago, I'll tip my hat to the new constitution, I'll tip my hat to the new constitution, take a bow for the new revolution, smile and grin at the change all around me, pick up my guitar and play, just like yesterday, then I'll get on my knees and pray. We don't get fooled again. No, we don't get fooled again. Thank you.